Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and folks at home. It's Tuesday, September the 25th, and this is the meeting of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. Lyle, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and we have a somewhat ambitious agenda for tonight, and including an update on the sewering effort going forward for the Common, and for which we have to take a position on supporting a certain warrant item. We also need to update all our members on what's been going on with respect to the zoning and coding effort on behalf of, and give more tools to the town to, as it were, get what they need and want for the Common. And basically to begin discussing and coming up to date on what's planned for, and get your input for our next event, which is October the 11th at the middle school on Russell Street. So, and also undertake a review and update on targeted housing that we're going to get from Anna. So I'd like to start, for purposes of just efficiency and also to make sure we all have a chance to vote on this and to hear it, I'd like to start with Chase, who's going to give us a quick update, or an update of suitable length on the progress of the sewering of the Common area. And this has to do with, our part has to do with support recommendation for Article 9, the borrowing of $2.2 million for design and engineering.
I appreciate your request to make it a suitable length. I can talk about this for a while. Sending a presentation to real quick. But while this is on its way to Mayor and all that, I'll give you guys a quick update on where we stand. So if you recall, last town meeting, spring town meeting, there was a proposed article that was ultimately withdrawn from the warrant, I believe on town meeting floor. And the reason associated with the sewer, and the reason it was withdrawn, is because we were, when placing the warrant articles on the warrant, we were still in the process of collecting survey results. At that time, we had essentially a larger sewering district than we currently have. And the reason the sewering district has contracted is because the response we got from residents within the sewer district was very different than the response we got from the commercial property owners within the sewering district. That is, the individual residents was very hot and cold. And unfortunately, the nature of the system is such that unless you have a certain threshold participation, it doesn't make sense to run a sewer line all the way to the end of a street on which only the person at the end of the street wants to connect and no one in the in-between wants to connect. And so what we did is we tightened up the sewering district to really focus just on those properties that were interested in participating. That still includes residential property owners, and frankly, this system is still in flux. None of the survey responses are binding, for and against. Maybe I would prefer it if the fors were binding and the against weren't, but we can't have everything we want. And so the smaller sewering district represents somewhere in the range of 60% of the total flow that we were looking at before. We've essentially gone from a 300,000 gallon per day system to a 180,000 gallon per day system. And that's really focused on the commercial property needs and a tighter districting. But the reason we pulled it back from the warrant is that we didn't want to put it on the warrant because at the time we didn't know if that was financially viable or not. We knew a larger district was viable. What we didn't know is a smaller district viable. We've now gone through the financial modeling exercises, and determined that it is financially viable. There are a couple of elements, though, that are critical here, and I want to touch on a couple of them. The most important is that what we're really looking at here is project financing opportunities that exist over a fairly wide range, and by that I mean state grants and external grants. And the projected costs and the financial viability associated with those costs is based on, in the modeling, about $6.5 million worth of $6.5 million worth of grant support. But that's an estimate, right? We've got certain grant support. If you want to flip to slide 3 on that, right, that would be very helpful. We've got certain grant support that we think is very likely. Then we've got other support which is more prospective. The top end of the grant support could exceed $10 million. The floor is probably closer to $2 million. And so until we get the support from town meeting to go forward, we're not in a position to apply for a lot of these grants in a credible way. That said, we've actually applied for, as this slide shows, we've applied for a MassWorks grant. We applied for that in August. That application was, let's say, aspirational. In that MassWorks prefers to fund projects that are probably closer to shovel ready than the sewer is, because what we're going to ask town meeting for, what we're asking the Board of Selectmen, or I suppose we is actually probably the sewer study committee, is asking for is the $2.2 million to support the design. And our expectation with the MassWorks grant is that though we submitted it this year, hopefully no one who looks at these is watching, but we don't actually expect to get it this year, but we submitted an application because we want to essentially create the paper trail that says, no, we as the town are substantially committed to doing this, and we think you should support it now, and we would love it if you did, but if you don't support it now, we understand. A year from now, when we have the design fleshed out, we'll be in a much better place. One of the most meaningful components of that grant application, though, and this was noted by several entities at the state, was the diversity and extent of support from our commercial property owners, those who would actually connect to the system. And remember, when I say that this is, we have a lot of support from the commercial property owners, this is a system that the commercial property owners are themselves paying for. The ultimate objective here is to create a self-funding system, right? So the town is only paying for the wastewater that the town utilizes to the extent that town facilities are connected to it. There's not some massive town subsidy that's picking up half the cost to making it financially viable. So there was a lot of commercial support there, and we had dozens of letters of support, I believe, individually written letters of support from property owners. One of the most significant changes from the spring to the fall is also that we were able to submit with that MassWorks grant a letter of support from the Point. As of 6 months ago, or frankly, as of about a year ago, we had met with representatives of the Point, and they said, we've got our system, we're good for another 10 or 15 years. Good luck to you. We wish you all the best. Not for us. That was not what we wanted to hear. We really wanted them to connect, partly because we thought it changed the financial viability of it, but also because there's a lot of wastewater there. The economics of this get better the bigger it gets to an extent. So we had to write off the Point. What has happened in the interim is that though their system is operating very effectively, I think they've made some business evaluations, as well as had some interactions with Mass DEP that's changed their perspective. And though there's a lot to address going forward in the design, I don't know the specifics of how their system meshes with our system, what the timeline of that is. That's very much a component of the $2.2 million worth of design that we're asking for. The Point has expressed a strong interest in participating on par with what everyone else has expressed. That is, yes, I want to participate. Let's work out the details in the design phase. And so that really changes some of our options and really, I think, improves the economics that we've got. Then what you see up here, the project financing updates, the other major thing that we're looking at here that helps with funding is the state revolving fund. Littleton, as a housing choice community, Littleton's eligible for a 1.5% loan, which a couple of years ago, 1.5% was not that interesting from the town's perspective. What's very interesting about the state revolving fund is that 1.5 or 2%, if we weren't a housing choice community, is by statute. So it's fixed and it's not indexed to a benchmark rate. So as rates continue to increase, the SRF becomes a much more compelling funding source for us. To the tune of, and frankly, the housing choice, the fact that we get a 0.5% premium here on the total cost represents somewhere in the ballpark of $500,000 to $1 million worth of capital cost that the SRF is, or the housing choice is offsetting for us, and more compared to what we would have to get if we went out to bond it. So if you want to flip to the next slide, Mary. So here's the whole ball of wax. The entire project cost, all phases, and there, if folks want to, I'm happy to, Mike said keep it short, and I think I've already screwed it up. But
No, we know.
the project is planned in 4 phases, 2 major phases. Phase 1 and phase 2, and within each of those phases are subdivided into 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, and those really have to do with where we extend the system out. What we don't want to do is go to the farthest reach of the sewering district and start there, right? You start in the middle and you build out incrementally. But putting aside the phased aspect of it, the total cost is $27.4 million in capital costs. That includes the design, the $2.2 million in the design. And the economics that I'm going to talk about in a minute is predicated on, you see that third bullet down there. It's assumed $6.7 million in funding, grants, and assistance, which is what we think is reasonable based on some of to the extent that we can read the tea leaves. And the most important tea leaf we have here is the fact that our state representatives earmarked $6 million in an environmental bond bill for Littleton Smart Sewer. Now, that sounds a little bit better than it actually is, because that $6 million is not a funded $6 million. We're doing a lot of work to make sure that the executive branch actually decides that that's a priority that they want to fill. Now, what it does represent is the legislature saying this is a priority in Senator Eldridge's district for environmental expenditures. We're actually meeting with, and we've met with Secretary Ash, who handles economic development issues, and Secretary Matt Beaton, who handles environmental matters. And this project, and I think this committee is really well aware of this. This project sits at the nexus of those 2 points, economic development and environmental aspects. And I mean, frankly, I think we could make an argument for it in either scenario, but its best scenario is, or best argument is that this is one of those environmental projects that also has a true and legitimate economic value and benefit, a long-range economic value and benefit. The feedback we've gotten is that Secretary Ash, and from an economic development perspective, they're much more interested in being able to say, this would bring Lockheed Martin to town. Well, we can't say that, right? And this would bring 400 technology jobs. Well, we can't say that. What we can talk about is the revitalization and the growth, and a lot of the zoning work that we've looked at here has really shown that there's a lot of potential there. But they're more interested from an economic development perspective in hard, concrete, this will definitely bring X number of jobs with Y salaries. So what we've been advised is that our best course forward is really finding support for this funding through Secretary Beaton's office, and we're working through that right now to realize that $6.7 million. And if we get the full $6 million out of the environmental bond bill, then we'll actually be well north of that 6.7, because that 6.7 also incorporates some more, let's say, more likely, more certain aspects of the funding sources. Now we'll flip to the next slide here, which is the actual costs. So you guys have probably seen some version of this. I think when we did various sewer forums, we presented this in some different capacities. What we're looking at here is costs for the middle column is a typical single-family residential property, 1 EDU, which is about 330 gallons per day. And that's maybe from a, each of us is handling our own house, that's maybe the best point of reference to look at. And what we're looking at is costs for the typical single-family home, the betterment assessment, we're looking at the sewer connection fee, the annual user charges, and then the typical cost for on-site lot and connection work. And I'm happy to go into details about this on a very detailed level, but what we're able to show here is that this, from a single-family home perspective, and from a typical two-family residential, which represents sort of your average business unit in town. Now, we have a couple big ones, right? The town is something like, I'm going to hazard a guess here, please don't quote me on it, 30 or 40 EDUs worth of capacity. The point is another 30 or 40. But most of our businesses are on the order of 2 EDUs. What this represents is a financially viable option for these property owners to handle their water and wastewater. So not only is it financially viable, but it also gets them out of the water and wastewater business, which we've heard over and over and over again, we don't want to be in. We don't want to, I don't want to deal with putting in a new septic system. I don't want to deal with, even if it wasn't a financial improvement for them, a lot of these entities would still pay above and beyond what they're currently paying for their septic. That said, what we're able to present is that this is an economically viable option for them, and that's frankly part of our disappointment that we weren't seeing the response we wanted in the single family level, the residential level, because frankly, we're looking at a one-time betterment payment of $23,000 as opposed to 30 to 35 to do a septic, and that assumes it's a really easy septic to handle.
Our neighbors paid 45, and that was a number of years ago. I'm sure it's more than that now.
And that's right. And if you've got to take out an existing field, you've got slope issues, you don't have perk, you've got to build it up. All these things just compound the costs from there. So, so we're looking at a one-time payment or an annual payment for, again, we'll look at the typical single family. We'll break those out, and the town will utilize for, if property owners or business owners want to break this up into annual payments, the town will utilize our borrowing capacity and our ability to get low-cost loans and simply pass that on to the user as a low-cost loan, plus essentially enough to make sure we're not, the town, the taxpayer isn't losing their shirt on it. And then the last page here, other updates with respect to additional partners. So what we're looking at here is also places to this system generates, if you could flip to the last slide, Mark. This system generates water that is suitable for reuse. And one of the places that we're looking to utilize that, certainly we can use that for irrigation purposes, but we're also looking to partner with businesses in town that would utilize it. And one of our most promising alternatives is mass ready mix. Because right now they're essentially pumping a whole bunch of water out of our aquifer, drinking water, and they're using it for their concrete production purposes. Well, if we can not pump that water out of our aquifer and use gray water, there's a financial benefit to us. There's also a substantial environmental benefit from leaving groundwater that we can otherwise utilize in the ground. So, these aspects are still ongoing. And that brings us to where we stand now. So the October 29th special town meeting The articles got jumbled up last night, and I can't tell you what number we're at now, although I can look it up. But it is looking for the town to support $2.2 million to do the system design costs. And to the extent here that we have, cost estimates have plus minus numbers on them because there's always uncertainty associated with these. To the extent that we don't exactly know how we would connect with Mass Ready Mix, how we would connect with the point, we're at a point where we think we can credibly argue that those are feasible, likely options. The design will take that to fruition. And the $2.2 million for design is the full system design, and that includes all of the phases going out, and also includes a significant amount of effort to go and get some of those grant funding sources. You can imagine you got to spend a little money to get a little money there, particularly if we want the technical support to really enhance our grant applications. So what we, the sewer committee, are looking for is input from the master plan implementation committee on thoughts, and in particular, if the master plan implementation committee is so inclined, support of this article at town meeting.
Thanks very much. In our usual custom, we're going to go start with you, Lyle. Comments, questions?
Sure. Thank you for clarity, and I've taken more notes on this than at any other point, and I think I'm beginning to understand it. Let me try to actively listen. $2.2 million is on the warrant for 1029 town meeting, and that will create the entire master plan, however far we pursue it.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's the design. Yep, full design costs.
Including the potential of tying it in with the Point or Mass Ready Mix.
Yep.
Brilliant. Gray water instead of drinking water. Don't need wonderful water to make concrete.
Right.
That's great. And hearing that the Point is back into being interested, because if I understand as a citizen, the Point and IBM saying, yeah, no thanks, we got this, is essentially what killed it for spring.
That's what killed it for the spring. The two aspects were the support that we thought would be there that wasn't there for the larger district that included the residences. Frankly, that part came about because we got a bunch of feedback that said a lot of people on the fringe of the district said we want in, and so we expanded it, and then, well, maybe we don't want in. So there were two aspects of it: the Point and IBM saying no, thank you, and the residences expressing less interest than we had anticipated.
And I see IBM has a big pile of dirt out in front of the building now, so I might guess that's something going on there.
And I will tell you, we are still actively pursuing IBM. What I'm personally not inclined to do is subsidize their wastewater work. Now, to the extent, I'm not their engineer, and we can't, well, I suppose we could, but I would say we're disinclined to dictate to them what to do.
Sure.
But they have some challenges with their system. It's very long in the tooth. We really thought that the Point may be 50-50 when we went into this, but IBM, we thought, of course, they're going to be on board.
Yeah.
So we're still working with them, but that's, a 10% chance we ultimately land that fish.
All right, I'll make this one my last one. Previous slide, I guess, the yearly payments or the total, so sticking to just the single-family residence.
Yep.
1440 plus or minus for 20 years, or 23 grand. So seeing the asterisk and connecting the dots, the three other line items in between are still annual, so it's,
Not all annual. So the sewer connection fee is a one-time fee.
sorry.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the typical cost of physical on-lot connection work, one of the things there is that the sewer, as most utilities do, they bring it to your property line.
Yeah.
But a property owner still has to, if you have a really simple system that you can just run out the front door, great, it's probably, could be even less than $5,000. But we wanted to help people understand that even after the one-time payment, that only brings it to your door.
Yeah.
You still have to get the pipe from your house or business out to the door, so.
with you. So the annual, regardless of whether you opt in to pay annually or one time of $1,440 annually or $23,000, still the annual charge is something like $1,300 a year to have your sewer handled based upon the gallons per day of a one-family home.
And that's based on 330 gallons per day,
Right.
as an estimated cost. Now, what,
Three-family home,
and
three-bedroom.
three-bedroom home, but frankly, very, very few three-bedroom homes actually utilize 330 gallons per day. That will ultimately, the expectation is that will be metered based on water usage,
Thank you.
but that's an estimate based on 330.
I'm up to speed, I appreciate it.
Okay. I don't have any questions. Thank you very much for the presentation and bringing us up to speed. My only comment is that it's very interesting from my perspective, being on the original sewer committee in 2010, to see everything kind of come full circle, because a lot of what you said went through a process, but it kind of came back to where we originally started. A smaller system, getting grant money, like a lot of this was what we were hoping for, but it's really great to see that the process brought us to where we are today, so.
Certainly has not been a short process, but I think we're interesting, even though we're essentially in the same place. We're
Yeah.
much closer to the finish line.
Right, yeah, I know.
I appreciate the information. I think there's a long way to go as a town before we're able to finally make a determination about if we are going to have a sewer and exactly what it's going to look like. I will say from an MPIC perspective, it would be difficult for me to understand how any of us couldn't support this. A lot of what we're doing right now relative to the common revitalization project, a lot of it is predicated on, significant improvements in wastewater treatment. Sewer doesn't have to be the answer, but it's the most likely answer. So I think that, from our perspective, we should be supporting it. Now, individually, because we may be affected by it, depending on where we live, we may have a different perspective when it actually comes time to vote, or we may decide as taxpayers we have a different perspective. But I think from a committee perspective, it's pretty straightforward.
And your comments I want to make sure the committee is aware. Daryl Baker raised a really interesting question last night that we hadn't parsed the numbers exactly this way, and that was exactly of the total pie, what's the town's piece of the pie? And we've asked our consultants to actually break that out. I have some numbers, but what I don't have is the total town cost, which I think is what the taxpayers will probably want to take a look at and be interested
Yeah, I mean,
in.
I was there for that question, and it was a good question. And, what we're seeing here is that, a significant portion of the funding, if everything goes right, some of it will be supported by grants, but at the end of the day, a significant portion of it will be borne by property holders. But the goal is, if it's not town use, the taxpayer shouldn't have to be responsible for it. We will front the funding, but we will get it back on the, hookup fees and the usage fees. But having said that, the town is a property owner.
Yep.
So it would be good to understand that, but you can't ignore the fact that as property owners, we have to treat wastewater. I mean, that's just there's no getting away from that. So even though that number is important and will affect, a lot of people's decision-making, I think we need to keep in mind that if we're not paying for this type of sewer, we will be paying for something else later on.
Well, and that does bring up a useful point, which is that right now, some of the town's wastewater is treated by a wastewater treatment facility housed at the high school.
Correct.
Relatively small system that, it's far from decrepit, but frankly, by the time this system is built out, that system would be on the hook for a substantial retrofit. And one of the things that we can offset with this project is the cost of that retrofit. And, we actually may utilize that system for a period of time, just to move us
That's a
through.
good way to look at it. The replacement cost is something that needs to be considered along with the cost of this. This isn't being done in a vacuum. If we do this, then we won't have to do that. If we don't do this, we will have to do that. So really, it's the net,
Yeah.
right?
It's
And
the net that's
the net
important.
cost, but there's also net benefit, pro or con, versus
staying with a non-sewered system, especially of the type that we're projecting to build out, which has its own benefits in terms of the way the wastewater is used. So again, I mean, these are all interesting points that I think are going to need to get borne out through the entire process. But again, I'll stick with my main point tonight, which is from an MPIC perspective, I think we should support this.
Jonathan? Oh, I was expecting, I don't. Okay, I have a couple of questions. One of them is, Ken, do you have a
I'm sorry.
map or
I do,
some kind of?
Maren, I saw you had the flyer up somewhere. So this is a mailing that's going to go out to, I think, everyone, all residents. Let's see. There's another better map.
Yeah, I couldn't get your presentation,
Oh,
but is
okay.
it on the?
I'm trying to think where the map is there. I know it's up there someplace, but, so the short answer is yes, there is a map. The longer answer is, oh, it's in the top right corner there,
Yes,
but again,
yeah.
that's fairly small.
Yeah. And it's not clear from,
No, it's not
you
clear.
have to figure out what colors and
Yeah,
what the colors
yeah,
mean.
the colors there essentially have to do with the type of property and the phasing associated with when it gets rolled out, commercial versus residential, phase 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B. Essentially, let me describe the district. It's in general, what we're looking right along the commons, some of the residential areas along there, essentially all the way down to Shattuck, the town hall, picking up the town's wastewater there, also picking up the wastewater that's currently piped from the fire station and the Historic Society building over to the high school, so it picks up all that. And then it also goes,
Could you pick up hours on the way?
to the extent that there are individuals literally right on the border, the answer is yes. None of this is 100% fixed, but what we can't do is, go half a mile down the road to pick up one person's. But people who are right on the edge, yes,
Well, we're on the other side.
it's viable. So
Uh,
I can get you a better.
So that's one question. I have two more questions. One of them is, I mean, I'm one of the, all my friends for years have been adamantly against sewers. And I sort of almost get into fights with some of them when we go at this. So do you have, I mean, I'm not quite sure what it is that they don't like, but they clearly don't like the idea of a sewer. I think it's sort of seen as a way to encourage development, and they don't like the idea of development, so they don't like a sewer. Do you have you heard from any of these people, and do you have any sense of how you might counter this sort of argument, which I think is just crazy, but, particularly after I saw my neighbor spend $45,000 to get an enormous mound in his backyard, I said, I don't want to spend $45,000, and I certainly don't want a big mound in the back of my yard. But, a lot of other people don't seem to feel that way. Do you have any sense of how you might counter those?
Let me give you the counter argument. Let me give you what we've heard and what we've understood, and that is that if wastewater is not treated on an individual's property, then the options to utilize that property expand in a significant way, which in my mind is a feature. But the counter argument to this is that then means that the town, lose control of development. Now, the way we've countered that is twofold. One is, frankly, the other work that this committee is doing, looking at form-based zoning and really identifying, what do we want the above-ground components to be? We don't want the sewer to exist in a vacuum, right? Because if we did just put the sewer in the ground, then and we did nothing else, then we are ceding a certain amount of control.
That's a good point.
But the other element of it is that what we don't want to do is run sewer past every beautiful open space parcel in town, essentially inviting development of those open space parcels. And so what we've done here is this is a just like you were saying, it started out as a small compact system. It expanded a little bit. It came back to a fairly small compact system. There's very little opportunity to overdevelop the common here in a way that isn't controlled by whatever the town collectively decides with respect to the zoning. So the concerns are not unfounded, but I think we've got enough checkpoints and roadblocks in the way to ensure that the town gets whatever the town decides that the town wants on the above ground portion of this. And that's partly why it's only a 180, 150,000 gallon per day system. We're not talking about sewering the whole town.
I think we should sewer actually a lot more than
Well-
what you're talking about, but that's
And I
an
actually,
issue for another day. I mean, I think Long Lake absolutely needs
We'll start here and see how this
Needs-
goes.
needs sewer.
I could not agree with you more, and one of the arguments here is that the commercial property owners here, because they generate more wastewater on a smaller footprint generally, make the economics of this much more viable than a purely residential system. If we were only sewering the lake area, for example, because I don't think anyone disagrees that they need sewering down there, the cost for this, just for the lake, would probably make it infeasible. But by looking at the lake as, let's call it phase 3, some indeterminate in the point, in some point future, we've now got a system, we've now got the expertise that we can pull in the lake. But the lake also presents its own challenges, right? How do we make sure that every square inch of a piece of property in the lake isn't built on at that point? I don't know, maybe that's what the town wants, but I don't think that's the case. But that's very much in the back of our minds here. It's just, we just don't think it's financially viable yet without bringing in a commercial base first.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you were starting to say that this is a marketing piece that's going out?
I would, it's going out. I probably wouldn't characterize it as a marketing piece, though it does have pretty colors. The objective here was informational. The sewering committee is trying very hard to present information and not advocacy. Certainly there are entities that want to advocate for it, but sorry, just
That's
quibble
okay.
with your semantics.
So in terms of information, will there also be any other means of getting the word out to people about what the changes are?
And so what we're looking at is planning a couple of things between now and town meeting. In fact, we have a weekly sewer call, and that's one of the items for discussion this Friday, is how are we gonna roll this out? Again, in telling folks what this is and what this entails. We don't have specific dates yet.
Okay.
Our expectation is to set those closer to town meeting.
Great. And then my second question is around timing on the back end.
I didn't touch on that, did I?
Are there forecasted dates that if everything were to work out well, that there's a time frame in mind?
There is a time frame in mind. The objective is that this town meeting, fall town meeting, if we get the support for the design funding, and I think it's important to note here that it's a borrowing article, which requires 2/3 support to go through. And I'll touch on that in a second. So this fall town meeting, spring, blessedly, you won't hear anything about the sewer. The plan is to have the design completed in approximately a year's time. And then at that point, we'll have also hopefully secured some of the grant funding and earmarks that we believe are out there, with the expectation to break ground in 1 to 2 years on it if things go, they don't have to go perfectly to break ground in 1 to 2 years, they have to go reasonably.
So something like maybe 2021.
2021, yeah, and then, 1 to 2 years of total construction on it, but a lot of that construction, certainly we have to put pipes in the ground and things like that, but a lot of the construction is simply the facility itself.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One thing I do want to touch on is that this was rather deliberately structured as a borrowing article, because obviously, though we could shake loose $2 million in funding from capital stabilization or other sources, certainly the 20 some odd $1 million is obviously going to need to be borrowing. And so frankly, we've imposed, to an extent, an artificial threshold here of the 2/3 majority required to borrow for the design funding, because what we don't want to do is get ourselves in a position of having just enough support to do the design, but not enough support to build it. And so that's, it's a much bigger hurdle to clear, but also is conservative and keeps us from creating a really beautiful, very expensive set of plans that is not going to get constructed.
All right, I just have a few comments and maybe some information. First of all, what I note with interest is the area, as our consultants, Fort Point, defined very early for us an area where they wanted to, shall we say, take an initial look at. It's called in one of the memoranda that's available to you here, called the area of analysis, and it pretty well covers, at least at this juncture, I guess we call the initial phase of build out of the sewer.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a happy coincidence. So as a practical matter, that makes it a little easier for things to be put together. The other thing, going up to a slightly different level, is that you're quite right. The moving forward to change the zoning, enhance the zoning, give it more strength, that cover the current zoning regulation for the common, is going to go forward regardless of the sewering, because without it, as you pointed out, Mike's pointed out, I think everyone's pointed out, without it, the town would not have, shall we say, the kind of control the town has expressed at once in the common. And secondly, in conversations with property owners, not all of whom are residents of this town, they also would like some, shall we say, something very different than what they're currently experiencing on a, shall we say, parcel by parcel basis, development by project by development, with planning and getting the okays, because it's apparently very expensive, time consuming, even though we're looking at a very long process here. I've spent some time engaging property owners around the common in conversation about, well, what is your plan going forward? And the answer to the question varies greatly on the issue of the resources, but what's very interesting to me is that practically all of them are looking for definitive times when the sewer is going to be there. When are you going to start? When is it going to roll out? When does it reach me? Because when I know it reaches me because of my cash flow, I mean, it's a different language. My cash flow is X, and I want to be ready at the right time to make my investment, to make better use of my property or whatever project I have in mind. So when do we arrive? So when an attempt is made to go through what the town is looking at, shall we say, the kinds of uncertainty that we're looking at, we're talking two different languages. Almost two different concepts of time, schedule, and use of resources. And I've been looking for different ways to bridge that gap. And the only way I think I can bridge the gap is to find what I call an anchor development, or someone who basically can take a longer view than, let's say, the smaller parcel owner in the common, and who's prepared to wait, let's say, generously 2.5 years before they break ground on what they have in mind, what they want to do. In fact, they would be very grateful for that kind of lag period. Others, not so much. Mm-hmm. And it really depends on who you're talking to.
Certainly. I mean, you were in the meeting when we met with Northern Bank and
Yes.
Trust, and they would like the sewer to be there yesterday.
Yes. But they're in a position where they could actually, quote, wait.
Yes.
Okay. Now, the other piece of this, which is even more, not frustrating, but more interesting, is that part of our arrangement with Fort Point is to try to understand what is what we'll call the financial aspect for the common being, shall we say, revitalized. And as you know from the workshop we had, there was one particular kind or type of, we'll call it scenario or build-out, that gained a lot of favor among the residents who attended. And I'm sure there are folks in town who don't find it attractive, but there are many more that I suspect do, or something like it. So when we've been working with what we'll call the economic analysis part of it, unfortunately, when you start projecting to the future, you're, junk in, junk out. I mean, it's fairly straightforward. So what the consultants have done is take a very conservative, and the reason I'm prefacing remarks is I want to be clear that what they've done is taken a very conservative view and in doing their analysis and comparing the various, quote, types or scenarios. So the idea is, instead of guessing or trying to guess what the assessments on properties are going to be in the future with a sewer, okay? Because nobody knows the answer to that until there's a transaction. The assumption is, of course, the value is going to go up because there's going to be more above ground.
I
Yeah.
would say that the qualitative assumption is that I do want to make it perfectly clear that the financial viability of this system is not predicated on that above-ground improvement. So, very interestingly, some municipalities have lost their shirts because they've put a sewer in the ground and it's a, if you build it, they will come kind of
Yes.
system. And the economics are predicated on the second part of that. If we build it, then we'll get all of this financial, we'll get all of this influx of tax revenue. This system is predicated on the existing structure that's there. Now, there's capacity in the system for improvements. Someone improves their property, they now quadruple their wastewater flow. That's certainly, we've built the system with that capacity, but what we have not incorporated is financially, we are not counting on additional flows to make this viable.
Well, all we've done is taken the current values and the current assessments and market basically what's going on right now in the marketplace and on assessment. So this is very concerned. For example, the assumption is that a two-bedroom apartment in the common is going to be $1,000 a month. Okay? That's actually below allegedly market, but that's the low end of the average. And we're using today's assessments and today's, shall we say, rates of, and when you do that, if you did approach scenario 3, sort of like just came up to the edge of it, it would basically double or come 2.5 times the current yield and tax revenue that the town is getting from that, excluding the IBM component, which is the largest in town and probably will remain that way for quite a while. As more housing, ironically, and offices, and to some extent retail develops in the common, the amount of tax revenue starts approaching $1 million plus per year. Now, as Mike Fontanella will remind us, compared to our total budget, it's not much. But I'm saying that the lifestyle
Pretty nice new
issues.
growth, I'll take it.
What?
I said it's pretty nice new growth.
No, I'm just saying that, however, this has got to happen based on people who own the property, not on what the town does. So I am very glad to hear that the attitude taken about the sewering is the sewering goes in, we're not waiting, it's not putting a sewer and they'll come. It depends strictly on the folks who are there. But what we have clear evidence is that by making better, they'll be in a position to make better use of their land, they get their hands on the necessary resources to improve it, the area could become quite viable.
I think that's a very strong talking point.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very strong.
Well, I mean,
Point.
it's something, I think, we have an X without, and yet we have X plus if we do.
And one of the components of this message is that whatever that plus is within the town's control to a degree. I mean, to the extent that we can control zoning, we can dictate what that plus can look like. And that's the other point that I don't want to lose track of, because without that very important caveat, we end up in that criticism of, well, great, X plus, but X plus is something that
A monster
we
that
may
we don't
not
want.
want.
Yeah.
When in fact, I would say that the sewer has to happen in conjunction with the above-ground zoning. The flip side of that, though, is that the above-ground zoning, suppose this article associated with the sewer design is defeated, the above-ground zoning considerations still absolutely must go forward. One is predicated on the other, but not the other way around.
And one final thing, I wanted to take the vote quickly. I just want, as a revival of an old question, and that is that is there an immediate, or at least something that you could point to, that if we do follow through and actually build the system, what are the pure environmental gains in view of our current, and shall we say, what does the trend line look like? Does anybody know this?
Yes. So, Aaron, up there, would you flip to the second page of that? And if you could zoom in on the bottom right of it? So, I can tell you the amount of trucking miles that this takes off the road. I can tell you the amount of fuel that it offsets per year. We're talking about 40,000 pounds fewer of nitrogen removed annually from groundwater. Almost 1 million kilowatt hours of renewable energy generated a year, 4,000 tons of organics, 57,000 gallons per day of drinking water that we're not pulling out of the ground. So to the extent, do I have a trend line and I can show you a break in that trend line? We haven't modeled it quite that way.
Yeah.
But this does get at the myriad environmental benefits. And I haven't touched on those. The environmentalist in me would prefer to make this argument as much on the environmental grounds, but I recognize that the town is probably more likely to go forward based on the economic grounds.
Okay.
Well, I think some people would really like to hear those environmental
Yeah,
things.
and that's why
And I
we,
think that would be very important for some people.
of this whole mailing, this little bottom right corner, that's my bottom right corner. I think they're vital.
So if we didn't do the sewering, just taking a look at this would be the loss. In other words, we would be, if we don't do it,
Opportunity loss, yeah.
opportunity
That's
loss.
the cost of doing nothing.
Yes, all right.
And what's not incorporated in this, and this goes back to one of Mike's points about not doing this also incurs certain costs. We're looking at the need, Light and Water is looking at the need of developing a new well site because we're at a point where we need to look into the future and do we really have the withdrawal capacity that we need? We're actually already developing one, but 57,000 gallons per day of water that we don't have to pump out of the ground is a huge amount of cost that the town would not have to realize to develop a new well site, for example. So
That's powerful stuff, yeah.
It puts the water back in our watershed, whereas other systems like Acton, it takes the water out and then it dumps it into a river and puts it into another watershed, which is horrible for the environment. So this system actually mindfully keeps it in our watershed.
yeah, it certainly balances the watersheds much more.
Well,
I did also note, for anyone's interest here, the town GIS has a proposed common sewer district map in it. So if anyone wants to take a look at that, I'll send the link out later.
well, if there's no further discussion, I'd like to, as it were, go ahead for a motion to support the warrant item for a 2.2 million borrowing.
I make a motion that the MPIC support the borrowing article for the design and engineering for sewering of the Littleton Common area.
Motion, do I hear a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it.
Okay.
I will inform, in view of the vote, I will inform the administrative office to so note this.
Before I leave, may I just say something real quick? Unfortunately, I have to leave. Is it okay?
Yeah.
I say
Yeah, sure, please.
Okay, I just wanted to express my support in form-based code. I did my own kind of research over the last couple of weeks, and I do support it. So I know I won't be here for the vote, but I do support that. And then I just wanted to pass that back with a little note, so. Thank
Is
you.
it spelling error? Is that the problem?
Yeah, there's
Okay.
2 L's in Russell Street.
Okay,
That's it.
okay.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Megan. All right. Resuming our agenda. If there are no further questions, I suggest that we go to sort of catch up on form-based code so that everyone understands where we are at the moment. In summary, last night, the Board of Selectmen followed the planning board, which voted Thursday night to support and recommend our request for $42,000 to explore, implement form-based code for zoning in the common. So it's part of what we'll call the pathway that we'll be following in order to achieve the objectives that have been repeated here, that we want a common where the town, to the extent possible, and we believe form-based code will allow us to do that more easily. It's not a panacea. It's going to be difficult, but nonetheless, it's better. It would be better than what we're using now, and also it would help us replace what's weak at the moment. So I wanted to bring up that that's been approved. And is there anyone here who would prefer that we not do it? And I just want to make sure that, you know, we're moving ahead with consensus. Okay, so I'm just going to, that's going to be, the last board that has to approve, or another board that has to approve is FinCom, and they've communicated to me that as long as the Board of Selectmen approves, that they will as well. So my assumption is tonight that at their meeting that they will approve it. And I've reminded the chairman of the sequence of events, and he's acknowledged them. So that's where that is. We have done the are there any questions about the progress of the form-based code? Are there any comments about that? Okay.
No, I think it was a very good presentation last Thursday at the planning board, and I think that was very, very effective, and Mike gave a very good statement on that, and I think that worked that was very well put together, Mike, and I think, you know, most of us were there, and I think it was a very good presentation by, what's her name again? Julie.
Yeah.
And so it really looks good, and I've been reading some stuff about it that we put together.
I just want to give Julie a call out. She had been, I don't know if she'd been told the wrong location or she assumed the wrong location, but she had to run over here late, significantly late, and pull herself together and make a presentation. And she did it. She pulled it off admirably given the circumstances, and it was a very good and very informative presentation. And I think it went a long way towards helping the community understand why we think this is a good idea and what the benefits are. She did a great job.
And thanks again, Mike, for, and Mike also came to the rescue last night, excuse me, on Monday evening with the Board of Selectmen when a question came up, and he rallied the troops so that we got through there. I'd like to now turn to our next big task, and to leave some energy and time for two big topics. One of is targeted housing, and the other is member input, in particular because Jonathan's got something special too, and maybe with help, we're going to hear about this. Let me get some idea here. Would we like to hear about targeted housing before we go into our next, the open house format and preparing for that? Or do you want to go on item C first? Under one, revitalization of the common. Whichever one, however you want to use your energy.
Let's just go in order.
Okay, so if you look at, there's a new flyer that basically summarizes, it's a one-pager with 3 pictures on it, and it just got produced today. And what I'm looking for or hoping to get, in addition to any corrections or additions, is
Just got one correction.
yeah, Russell Street, or shall we say, feedback on, shall we say, the message, the utility, the power of this, because this will be the flyer that will be used for all our purposes, going forward, advertising, spreading the word. The only place where it won't be visible is I've already arranged for the electronic billboard to announce the meeting about a week in advance. So I I realize I'm springing you on this at the last minute. I apologize, but sometimes your first impression for flyers is the one that really matters. So, Mike, do you have any views?
No, it looks fine to me.
Okay.
I will say that I have a school committee meeting that night, so I will only be able to attend the very beginning of it. But
Okay.
that's sort of thing's inevitable, so it's not a
Good.
problem.
The good news is I did check the calendar, and the school committee meeting was the only opposing, school function going on that night.
Right.
so.
And lucky for you, it's a, you can
Yes.
come in and leave.
Exactly. I think.
So, so it's going to come in and leave, and it's going to take steps beyond, obviously, steps beyond where we were in the summer. And this will give a chance for hopefully a lot more people to come in and take a look. The hour's been selected to attract more. I went past Shaker Lane School tonight. They were triple and double parked in their parking lot, and they were also out on Shaker Lane itself, and I was very tempted to quickly run home and make 150 copies of this. So whatever they were doing, we ought to do. Okay, so maybe we should have a child seminar with it. So we-
Curriculum night.
Yeah, so
I
people,
mean, that's actually, I don't know if you were being serious or not, but it may not be a bad idea to line up some amount of childcare.
it's been mentioned before, and Marion, what's our experience been with childcare?
It would certainly be worth testing again.
Okay,
Meaning it didn't go very well
It
last time.
was, it was well utilized, there was some background stuff that
Okay.
got in the way. But,
so maybe we can start searching that one out,
Yeah.
so we could add that and say, childcare services, available or something like that included.
So to what extent will we be managing this, or will Fort Point be doing most of the managing?
The posters, the images will be managed by Fort Point and their colleagues. I think we should be present in force to answer questions, to encourage people to push their way
I certainly
in.
intend to be there.
Yeah, I think we ought to be, as it were, our presence known, and any help we can give. And there will be snacks, in case those of you who only come to meetings, unless there's snacks. Okay.
So I know that was a choice. Can I
What?
only come to meetings if there's snacks?
Well, we like to have those.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, go right ahead, please.
It says, we hope to gather your input on the final vision for the common,
Yeah.
to finalize the, is this really the final vision?
good point.
Yeah, because we're moving, the next step is to take what the residents have expressed an interest in, which is, this much of a bandwidth, and then turn it into zoning code.
I wouldn't, I would kind of agree. We're not final, we're narrowing the vision.
Narrow, yeah.
We're focusing it.
So maybe a slight rewording there as we finalize the vision, or something of that sort, rather than
Well-
on the final vision. I mean, I could see how you could read it the way we want it to be read, but some people might assume that there's gonna be a final vision that's presented there.
One of the points that was made last night, based on a question from the Board of Selectmen, was that when we think about form-based coding, there are choices. So it's not gonna be a final vision, because there's gonna be room for the developers, depending on what the community and what ultimately gets passed at town meeting for any zoning changes, including form-based code. It's probably gonna be a spectrum of choices. It's not gonna be, this is the only thing you can build, this is the only way it can look. There will be a range. The question as a community that we have to get our heads around is, how much of a range do we want to give them, and what do we want in that range in terms of look and feel and other aspects of what defines form-based code. So I agree, I don't think this will be final at all. We'll be getting much closer to defining what the form-based code is gonna look like in the other zoning changes. That's the final part. It's like, we're gonna be done with the effort to define the zoning changes in any form-based code that we wanna use. But the vision of how the common is going to look will ultimately be determined by developers, the marketplace,
Yeah.
and as they use those those parameters. So I'd be careful about how I phrase that.
Yeah, the way maybe to capture it is, the idea is that we're trying to get code that will be sort of like a book of styles from which the developer then can select. But what we're trying to do is to include things and by definition exclude things. So that's how the control will be expressed. So in that sense, it will be, it has a particular goal, in other words, to set the range of styles. I believe that would be pretty close to
But
it.
I agree, I think we should tweak that language. Thank
Just a
you.
little bit, I mean.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. More?
No, on that, that's all.
Okay. That's very useful. Any other comments? Yeah,
I don't have a comment on this, but I did want to make sure that we talk about how we're going to do our outreach.
okay. Well, if you mean the devices we're going to be using is, in addition to the electronic billboard, which is fairly standard, articles being prepared, either an article or an outright ad for the newspaper, so because people still are reading the Independent, announcing it, and also including the flyer as part of the material. I will also have this sent off to, I guess it's called Acton or Action, which is another insert that's sent around. And I'm also looking to see if we can get this flyer inserted into the monthly bill for either electric, whatever it is that's sent out at the end of the town. Because it's so scattered, is I've been looking for social media, either Facebook and Twitter accounts that are, we'll call, not town-wide, but basically hit a large spectrum. And I was wondering if anybody here. Yeah. I really would like to get into the folks who have kids and who ordinarily try to pay little or no attention to what's going on elsewhere, to come and, when you meet up with them and start the conversation about this, they're very interested, but time is a premium for them. And so it's tough.
I
Yes.
have one, maybe Mike can help me with this one. I think the schools send out a packet or an email to
We
the.
send a lot, we have
To
Twitter, all our
parents.
principals have Twitter, and the superintendent has Twitter accounts.
Yeah, we've used that a few
and-
times, and
yeah.
that kind of hits that
Right.
demographic.
So we can
Talking
certainly
about
use,
kids.
if you send it to the school department, they will send it out in a number of ways.
Okay.
I think also being able to get the flyers, as old school as it is, into the hands of people who actually have their businesses in the common. I think that was really fruitful last time, to get people to come to the July event. So can we get some volunteers to help with that? Because it took me like 3 days to cover everybody in the common,
Yeah, I'll be out there.
other than you, so.
Oh, well, okay. I mean, I live close to the common, so it's.
Well, I know.
But,
I would love to help, but I'm just not usually in town when most of those businesses are open.
All right. Need some other volunteers to walk the common for about an hour?
Oh, I'll do that, I can run around. Just
Okay.
let me know when.
Great,
okay,
thanks.
yeah, we just have to make enough of these
Yeah.
for ourselves. All right.
That's easy. We also need to, I will reach out to Kurt Gardner, EEA, because the grant funds that are funding a lot of this study, he was hoping to understand when the public outreach opportunities were.
Oh, so we could actually attend?
I will let him know when it is.
Well, that would be pretty cool.
We can also ask the Littleton Business Association to circulate it to their mailing list.
Yeah, I've contacted James
Have you
tonight
contacted
and
James?
told him I'm going to be sending him a flyer electronically to
Okay,
issue his
good.
members. And I'm also going to be chatting with the folks from Northern Bank, the two reps, the two folks who visited us. We've been discussing, so
Okay,
but we're
good.
just getting.
Back to the Facebook group
Yeah.
discussion for a moment. Let me talk to Cindy Napoli, who excels at exactly this and is well connected to a number of different
Yeah.
substantial Facebook communities that I
Okay.
think
And,
Would be very interested.
okay, and I do know you can post stuff on Facebook, so
Mhm.
the flyer might work. So we're going to have to work pretty quickly to get the corrections made and then out to, not just for distribution, but also to all the folks here who have, shall we say, contacts with outlets, if they're not outlets themselves. And I'll find out from you who in the school department I should hit with this. Any other suggestions? Okay. Targeted housing, Anna. And just to set the stage, just so we know, this, we're not doing this out of the blue. This is one of the initial 7 top items that we have been promoting and guiding.
So by targeted housing, I, assuming that you mean the senior housing.
Yes. At the moment, that's the form it has taken,
So
yes.
the planning board currently has a couple of applicants with proposals. One is on King Street. The other one is called Jones Meadow, which is off Spectacle Pond Road. And so what's been going on over the last couple of months is the review of their proposed plans, and because they're not quite hitting the mark of what the original senior residential bylaw was intending, there was discussion toward the end of the summer that perhaps we needed to amend the senior residential bylaw to be more in line with what we were thinking about as residents when it was first passed last year. So that's one of the reasons why I thought it would be important to revisit the master plan and some of the goals, because the amendments really do stem from a lot of that. So there are 5 amendments for the senior residential bylaw that are going to be on the warrant. And the first one relates to the size and the price points, because we wanted to make sure that housing in Littleton is varied, and that obviously the pricing is going to be varied so that we can meet the needs of a lot of different people. And so in the master plan, it specifically says on page 3, under the vision and goals, so one of the 8 primary goals of the overall master plan is to encourage a variety of housing that meets the needs of different age groups and is affordable to people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's one of the key reasons for making sure that we have that in there. The second amendment has to do with the location. So one of the contentions, I think, with these proposals that we have in front of us is that they are in existing neighborhoods, a little bit more out of the way, maybe not so conducive for seniors. And so the second amendment says, to site within such proximity to the Village Common Business District, the Point, or the MBTA station, so that in the judgment of the planning board, one or more of those locations will serve to support senior health, mobility, independence, and participation in the community. So that one in particular, under our housing section of the master plan, goal and recommendation number 1 is to focus on allowing greater density in places where it makes sense to intensify land use. Example, in recognized activity areas near the train station, around the common, in older industrial or commercial areas where redevelopment opportunities exist. So that's the reason for making that amendment, is if we don't want it there, then where? And where would be in those 3 potential sites, or proximity with those potential sites.
So what's the changes from what to what? We have now, I mean, what do we have after the spring, and what is this new amendment proposed to do about that?
Great.
And for anybody who's looking for all that information, it is posted on the planning board webpage. I have links to the existing bylaws and the proposed that went into the public hearing Thursday night, and then the town meeting report that's delivered to everybody's home will have the bylaw proposed amendments. So that'll be the text, it won't be the description, deeper description that Anna's providing.
Right, so right now, what I just read about the location, it's under a section called applicability, talking about that senior residential development should be in an area with 2 or more acres of land, et cetera. So this is actually in addition to what currently exists. So you just asked what was here before. So that particular location piece was not in the bylaw before. So we're adding it in to say, because right now there's no specificity about where in town to have it.
Which means that as I understand it, my understanding has evolved quite a bit since just last night, that we don't have a senior residential development that's disconnected from all of the resources that are valuable to residents in senior residential development. Is that
Wouldn't you say disconnected? What,
physically disconnected? That is, it's not.
isolated?
Yeah, isolated. That's inconsistent with.
Well,
sort of
I guess this
objectives.
is more in terms of what we'd like to see happen.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Right,
if we would like to
It
see.
phrases it in the affirmative.
Yes.
Here are the exact areas where we think you
It would be good to
achieve
have.
that.
It would be good to have.
You achieve that connectivity, you achieve those other objectives.
It's a good place for seniors, yes,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah, that's a good way to think about it. The third item in the amendment is related to wetland space. So currently, that one has to do with the amount of wetlands that are currently permitted. So this particular bylaw emphasizes that not more than 25% of the required minimum open space, or that not more than 25% is open space, and of that, 25% can be wetlands, and we're just lowering it down to 20%. And that, again, is to try to give residents who are seniors in that development as much usable open space as possible. Then the next one has more to do with what the amenities should be. So an accessible common area for seniors to congregate, sidewalks, walking paths, trails, and or other passive or active recreation and appropriate lighting. So again, that wasn't in there before.
So nothing was there before and you're adding, and the proposal is to add what you just read.
Correct. Correct. Then the last one, going back to our master plan, under recommendation, number 3 says, make the over 55 housing bylaw a more effective tool for creating options to help Littleton residents stay in the community as they age. So this particular one increases the amount of inclusionary housing. It says, up to 50% of the dwelling units shall be affordable housing, providing that the planning board may reduce the required number of affordable units to not less than 25% of the total dwelling units. And in all cases, the affordable units shall range from 60 to 100% of AMI. So what this is saying is that currently we have in the senior residential bylaw that 10% of the housing units in the development would be affordable. Now we're saying we'd like to bump that back up to the 25% minimum, at minimal 25%, but at most even 50%. So the whole goal of this is to say we want more affordable housing for our seniors. That was one of the intentions of this bylaw, was to be able to create more housing for seniors and that it be affordable, and that comes from the master plan. So one of the big reasons for having these amendments is because if we don't make these changes, we're going to continue to get applications that perhaps aren't what we want. So we'd rather try to move forward after fall town meeting, if this is approved, to be able to use this in a way that we believe more closely relates to what we intended in the master plan.
I have a question about the percentage of affordable housing. Has anybody done an analysis to determine, are there other communities where those limits are that high and it still encourages developers to show up and develop with those constraints. Because at some point, we could say 100%, and the developer's gonna go, well, I can't make any money or not enough money, I'm not gonna build that one, I'll go down the street to another town where I only have to do 15%. Are we going to price ourselves out of the market, so to speak? And then, I mean, I'm supportive of it in general, I just wanna make sure that we've done some analysis to make sure that the market is supportive of it as well.
Well, I know that I've seen pockets here and there where there are those kind of developments being built, albeit they might be with partners, a joint venture perhaps with a nonprofit organization. There are a lot of state dollars involved, so there are different ways of doing
Right,
it
so those
that
become-
aren't specifically
Right,
market
those become
rate.
publicly subsidized or some manner of subsidization.
And it depends, right.
No.
It depends. Some of them,
Right,
right. So-
but without that, you're leading to me believe that without that type of support, a general developer is not going to come in and build with that threshold of affordable housing units required.
Well, it's one of those situations that we have to keep looking for developers that will, and again, it depends on the developer where he or she gets their financing from, because it might be a function of the developer partners with other entities that are willing to put up some of the dollars, and so that allows that particular developer to build it without needing to make it true public housing.
And this is in response to 2 developments that have come since we've passed this bylaw last spring. So a short period of time and a small sample size.
Well, so one of the things that is happening with those 2 in particular is that the amount of affordable units is 10%. So I think we're looking at this and saying that number should have been higher. And that's one of the reasons for the flexibility in the number, is because certainly initially, when we have people currently here in Littleton who are on a wait list to be able to receive an affordable housing unit, then there is a need. And so if that need can be met by lowering this, and certainly in the future, 10 years from now, we have enough, we don't need to build any more affordable units, and we can reevaluate that.
Okay, thank you.
Now, that 25%, a developer would still be able to make payments in lieu of that entire 25% if they're developing at a certain size?
Warren?
Or is there now some requirement for a certain number of actual structures that are?
Okay, the amendment says that all other requirements of the inclusionary housing still apply. So yes, from between 6 and 19 units, the developer has the option of negotiating with the planning board for up to, or for the payment in lieu of, and then 20 or above would require to be on-site units.
My opinion doesn't change one way or the other. I just wanted to know if someone at 19 units would be able to pay their way out of all 5 units. Which I'm not sure would actually be bad for the town, actually. In some locations might prefer that.
The payment this year would be just over $160,000 per unit. So theoretically, if the developer is building small units, he would want to provide them on site no matter what.
And then if I may just add, there is another bylaw, the accessory apartment bylaw, that has been amended as well. And in terms of our master plan goals, that one is item number 2, work toward increasing the diversity of Littleton's housing stock in neighborhood-friendly ways by encouraging small accessory apartments on owner-occupied residential lots. And so this has been amended primarily to provide greater clarity around the different types of accessory apartments. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and it's based on work of the zoning board of appeals and the building department over the last, year and a half since that bylaw was put in place, where if it was a true in-law situation, it was becoming too expensive for families to meet the new code. It's like, okay, well, we need to recarve out that method for the in-law apartment. So this bylaw amendment would do that.
So I think what we're seeing is two bylaws that were put into place. We kind of took them out for a test run, and we're seeing, you know what? There are probably some better ways to work with these specific bylaws if we make some small amendments to them, and that's essentially what we're doing with this. Yep. So any other questions?
I just have at the moment, with rising interest rates, the number of housing starts in the United States are going down. So, how much of this profile, how much of the profile that has been redeveloped in these amendments are looking for? Are these going to be owned by the target market, or are you looking at rentals, or are you neutral on this? In other words, is the idea to encourage purchase, or is the idea you don't really care, it could be purchase or rent? And the reason I'm asking that is because of the shift in the economy that may be only 5 years, but that could make all the difference on, you're doing more than testing your amendments, is what I'm getting at. You're also, as it were, running up against the way the economy churns.
Right, so that is something that is still to be determined in terms of who the applicants are, but I think based off of the residents' desire to have affordable housing for its residents, it's, I think, incumbent upon us to take a look at both.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, and this is then connected with the next question, which is, and you have mentioned that you use the median income, is that correct?
Area median income, yes.
Okay. So in other words, assets are not counted.
So
I'm not
it's
attacking, I just want to make
based on
sure.
income, yes.
Okay, so in other words, someone could have, and I'm making this number up, 5 million in stock,
No,
5 million stock, and have a net income of, let's say, 2,000 a month.
okay, area median income is used for determining the sales price of the unit. In order for a purchaser to qualify, they have to qualify through the state program that looks at income and assets.
So in other words, that $5 million would be discovered.
Okay. I'm actually getting around to a different issue, and that is, it's not
Well,
so
what's the
much that
question?
seniors are hiding the assets. It's sometimes the information available to the population about effective use of assets as opposed to what we'll call the daily cash flow. Fixed income, and assets very often are not, shall we say, totally informed.
So what's your question?
So my question is that, are you going to be following state definitions in this process of determining who's eligible for this? And if you are, but we're not going to be under the state guidance, basically. We're going to be independent of the state as originally envisaged, correct?
Well, that is something that the town has said it wants to do, yes.
Okay. Interesting, okay.
So any more questions?
One quick one. Of the two projects that we currently have right now, if these bylaws were in place, what's different about those? I think I know what they are, but I think you've probably thought about this more than I have.
So if these bylaws were in place, those two developments couldn't be senior residential housing special permit in those areas.
Neither of them? I wasn't sure if the one by the train station.
And
Well, and I think The one on off Spectacle Pond Road clearly is not. I
Too
think
far
that-
afield
Too
from-
far afield.
Okay.
The one on King Street has other amenities close by, and, 10 years ago, when we were first talking with the Webbers about their property, it was said that, it's a 12-minute walk to downtown. And so that's a decision that the planning board would have to make at that
Okay.
point. Is
So that
it-
then falls under that
Special
squishy
permit.
language where
Right.
planning board needs to.
Well,
look
because
at
it goes
Okay.
back to proximity,
Yeah.
so it's a function of what is the proximity, and as Maren said, are all of those living lifestyle comments associated with that particular area
Okay.
going to be there or not?
Now, if, let's say, outside of the geographic constraint, still looking at those two, how else would they have to be different? Supposing that they're both in the right geography.
Well, the latest proposal for King Street added amenities on site.
Correct.
So
Okay.
I think they've really stepped
And
it
the
up.
proposed tennis
But
courts.
after feedback from the planning board
Right.
that said,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
It was-
so it didn't originally come with those.
Right.
Right.
And probably the biggest change would be the number of affordable units. So in the case of King Street at 17 right now, the number of affordable units could be at minimum 25%, so 5 units, and at most 50%,
Okay.
9 units. So that's what the difference would be.
I understand that's much better than I did at 10 o'clock last
Okay. Well, it was pretty late last
night.
night.
Yeah.
What is it, what is the ask, if any, from us?
Well, the ask is, in terms of, this is one of the 7 priorities that we, as a committee, decided to take on, and this is primarily intended as an update, but also to make sure that you all know about the bylaws, get your feedback on them, and ultimately to be able to also try to promote and encourage, right? I mean, that is part of our mission, is to promote and encourage. So as we are in the community, making sure that if there are questions asked about this, that we're able to address them or have them sent to one of the planning board members tomorrow. And
Are there any, other than text in the draft, are there any flyers, one-page memos? Or, what I'm looking for is,
well, similar to the information that Chase is sending, that Chase and the sewer committee is sending out, there can certainly be maybe something drafted that can be put online.
okay.
Yep.
Well, the town meeting report will have a blurb explanation, supposedly clear English explanation for each.
Yeah, that's what I was worried about in terms of, is the plan, we're putting these amendments in because, and this is what we're hoping to get from it, and we need your support to see if we can get it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what's really nice about this, there's no money involved, so.
There is no money involved,
So
correct.
this should be very popular. Okay.
Given all the other money on the table, right?
Yeah. Are there any other comments, or?
So, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know that this requires a vote of support, but certainly would,
You can certainly ask for it, and we should, since it's one of our 7, I don't know how conscience-stricken we can be, but is there an interest in, yes, please.
Well, I would like to consider this, but without actually seeing the specific wording in advance and so on. I'd rather not take a vote now. I think we will have another meeting before the,
Our next meeting is going to be scheduled for October the 16th.
so we would have
I mean,
another
we have one
meeting.
on the 11th, it is
Yeah.
the event, then we have one on the 16th.
So if
But-
we could have the material before that, we could maybe take a vote then. I'm a
Let me
little hesitant
point out
about
something.
doing it now.
Yeah, the reason I'd like to do it, the reason that one would push it for now, has to do with the very practical reason of hitting a deadline for the printer who prints up the warrant. And my mailbox has many messages from the administrator, the head administrator of the town asking for it. So I'd like to be able to respond in a timely manner in order to reach that deadline.
Now, the alternative to that is certainly, Board of Selectmen last night took the same tack that you're describing because we weren't familiar with it anticipating this in the last 24 hours, I've worked to make myself more aware of it. Our expectation is that come town meeting, Board of Selectmen will still express an opinion with respect to it. It just won't show up in the
Okay.
written documentation that goes home, but it will be noted.
I think maybe we should follow, would that work for you? Work from your point of view?
Well, obviously, if people look at the written warrant document that the planning board put it out there, but that's not written that anybody else supports it, I don't know if that's problematic or not, so.
I would expect that the warrant would still say, recommendations from Board of Selectmen, MPIC, et cetera, forthcoming, rather than being silent on it, which,
Well, for zoning bylaw amendments, it's not unusual to only have the planning board recommendation.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful voice when they
Oh.
let anything through at all. I mean, they almost don't need us.
Well,
I'm thinking of it from our
it
point of
certainly
view.
helps.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, it is, from Mpic's role, I think that this is one of our 7, and we have to look at this, I don't mean critically in a negative sense, but we have to look at it and see, does it provide the guidance? It's admittedly another experiment, because we don't know if it's going to work, right?
Well, it amends it to the language of what we intend from the master plan.
Right. So the only thing I'm suggesting here is that we could follow the one of two pathways. We could say our support is forthcoming and wait till the 16th, or I think the more resolute position would be the chairman's opinion that we're on record of supporting it, mainly because, well, is it lack of knowledge or you don't like the sound of it? I mean, that's the.
No, it's really lack of knowledge. I mean, not
Yeah.
having had a chance to even look at it before, tonight, and then just
Sure.
sort of hearing Anna's thing. I mean, it's sounding good, but I really like to have at least a little chance to sort of review things before
Mike?
doing that.
What's your view?
I think we would be fine voting it on the 16th, in making sure that it says on the warrant, MPIC recommendation coming. That's very standard at town meeting, and then it'll just get announced by the town moderator prior to opening debate on the article that, MPIC has voted in favor or not, as the case may be. So I think if people want more time, I think it is valuable for us to weigh in, because I think, we are driving the master plan process that this is. Anna was very correct in pointing out, is this stuff is clearly hooked into that, so we should be supporting it. But I think we can delay it if we want to. I'm gonna support it one way or the other, so.
Yeah, same here. So, should we take the agreement that we'll do it as a forthcoming, and on the 16th, we'll take a vote first thing, put it at the top of the, and theoretically, October the 11th, I could gather you all in one room and we could have the vote there. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay.
That's fine.
All right. All right. We'll come back to upcoming meetings for November last, but what I'd like to go is to member input and couple it with public input. I gotta.
Sneakily enough,
Yes.
my member input also involves public input.
Right.
My member input is that last Thursday, Carolyn, here present, presented a very valuable, a very interesting discussion of the history of the town common. And I think in some ways that could well inform some of our ideas going forward about what we might do about it, and certainly could add to the interest that people would take in sort of looking at where it's come from and where we might be going. And so I wonder, Carolyn, if there's some way that we could get you involved in that. Mike asked whether you had a written copy of what you presented. My guess is no, but you have slides, right?
Yeah, I do have the slides, but I don't have it quite written out.
Well, since I stirred the pot a bit on this with Jonathan, I'll explain what I have in mind, and that is that,
Sorry to.
all right, I mean, it's maybe not something you want to do, but, and I hope other members weigh in quickly, cut me off the pass on this, but it has to do with identity and who and what Littleton is. And it's difficult for people to come to some sort of general community understanding of who they are without some sense, some glimmer of history. No matter where you live, there's a history to your location. Most of the time, it has enough good stuff in it so you can ignore the bad stuff, but there's something there. And what I'm looking for, quite frankly, is to help in our effort when we're revitalizing the common to try to come to, is there a way for us that we haven't thought of before, where somewhere in the history of the common, and I don't really care what era it's from, whether it's, what it is there something that we can pull from the history, a story, a tradition, that allows us to say, this captures what Littleton really is. And I don't mean to make gratuitous comparisons, but for example, Acton and all the rest, we don't have what I would call, when I talk to folks in Littleton, except those who have families who go back several generations lived here, they have a sense of history quite clearly, well-founded. But newcomers, people who've been here only 20 or 30 years, have no idea, because you ask them what was going on in the common, and I have to find someone almost as old as I am and who's lived here to say, oh, cattle used to come through the common. Now, in Texas, that would mean something, depending on the cattle brand and who owned it. But in Littleton, I have no idea. So part of my motive, very frankly, Karen, is, if you pardon the expression, is crassly commercial. Because what I'm interested in really is reviving self-awareness in the town about where we were, where we come from, and where we may be going. So that's why I was interested if you had any written accounts, and the committee here working with you over the next week or so may be able to find in that text, in the material, a richer source than is currently available elsewhere.
For something to put together for the October 11th, I mean, to have, like, post.
Well, what I was frankly, I was trying to think of something that if we could capture even before that we could perhaps incorporate into what we'll call the poster presentation. I mean, making more of this maybe than other members want to do, but I'm looking for something that has a spark to it. And, history is one way or tradition and history is one way, but we don't have to follow that at all. Let's get some other opinions in here before. Lyle, what's your, I mean, of all people, you probably have a magisterial view of this.
Perhaps tying together Jonathan's point to Anna's point and to this, it is wise to proceed with no surprises or as few surprises as possible. How do you do that with a group? By providing as much opportunity to learn before you show up to make a decision. So if there's any amount of that we can foster, engender, encourage as part of this group, then we should. So Sounds like, Jonathan, Carolyn, this is a useful piece of information. I don't know what it would take to get it in front of people, but if we
Right.
can help that become so, we should be able to bring some resources to bear for that.
So the first thing you're saying, I think, is we need to get what's in the meat of the bone here. Yeah, okay. So that would, Carolyn and Jonathan, I think, could put together something that could be delivered to the members for reading and informative purposes. It could be a summary of, or with what you consider to be the big highlights, along with the slides. I mean, I'm going to leave it to you and Jonathan, sort of like what would make this interesting.
Carolyn, I'd be happy to work with you on that if you'd be willing to. I mean, you're doing an awful lot all the time.
Yeah, no, we're gonna try to put something together. Just have to find out what you really want.
Chase, what do you think?
I love the idea of cultivating and curating the stories that define the sense of place. You know, we're so enmeshed in the nuts and bolts of zoning, of sewer, of, you know, how we do all these things that I think we, frankly, just we as a committee and sometimes the community as a whole loses track of that sense of place. And that's what's compelling about this idea to me, that it drives us forward more qualitatively,
Yeah.
but with a better sense of who we are. So I'm fully supportive of it.
Anna?
So I think when the Master Plan Update Steering Committee was going through its process, I recall seeing a lot of fabulous photographs at the Historical Society that really look back to what the community was like back then, whether it was, and I don't even know if this was in the common, but there was a horse racetrack, there was a big swimming pool, there was a theater. I know now we have a theater, but so there were definitely community activities that were going on. Perhaps that could be, as you said, Chase, a sense of place. People went to the common for a purpose, and what was that purpose?
Mike, any comment?
I concur with all of it. I don't think, and the more we have to engender enthusiasm, the better. And if we have somebody who's willing to do the work, even better.
Well, I hate to put it on the
That's
two
not
of
us,
you,
that's
but
not me.
Right, I mean, we've got the photos all gathered, I just.
Yeah, we could work together. We've worked together very well on some of these hidden treasures programs, and I've appreciated very much, working with Carolyn on that. So I think we could figure out
So
something.
we're looking for, I mean, what I'm looking for is something that really could strike a chord, give a sense of what Littleton is a place, connecting today with yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for agreeing to work with one of our members. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, by the way, very, very much, both you and Jonathan. Upcoming meetings, the only.
I just have, it's ironic that we talk about this because, I'll just read a quick paragraph here to show you your place in history. Insofar as it is possible, we would like to retain the old-time charm and beauty of the Common, while at the same time attracting professional offices and specialty shops into this area. While we recognize that our hopes for the Common may take a long time to achieve, we believe that a start must be made now, and we would like to think that we have taken the first few necessary steps towards a revitalized and attractive Common that will be a credit to our town. And that comes from the Board of Selectmen's report ending year December 31st, 1967. So 50 years later, I think you've done more than we've done in the last 50 years. So I read that and I thought, geez, that could have been written yesterday. It could have been written
Maybe our problem is that everything in Littleton just goes very slow. It just takes generation to
I mean, by
occur.
that metric, it's only taken us 10 years to move the sewer forward.
Yes. This is-
Relatively
this is- So,
Yeah,
you
maybe
know.
we'd be proud, right?
Yeah.
So, here is your pyramid. Okay. Okay, so the only meeting up that's uncertain is the, oh, I'm sorry, any more comments?
No, no.
Okay, okay. Are there any other member inputs? So make sure I don't want to slide past anyone. Okay.
Just one quick note, and that's
Please.
that the Transportation Advisory Committee met
Ah,
2 weeks ago.
Okay.
Sort of the transportation spin-off
Yes, yeah.
of this. And, you know, what we're still grappling with is defining the mission, sort of that iterative process of, okay, let's go back to the master plan, let's look at what the master plan says we want, and we'll go forward with that. We've decided that the most effective meeting schedule is probably just on a quarterly basis to really coincide with some of the budgeting and priority setting exercises associated with our you know, town government, and in particular working with Chris Stoddard, who's been very supportive
oh, good.
of working with us. So that is now off the ground and it's moving, and I believe our next meeting is not scheduled yet, but it will be in the fourth quarter of this year to sort of coincide with Chris's priority setting exercises for budgeting. And then the next quarterly meeting will be looking at not just the budgeting aspects, but the actual, okay, now he's got some sense of what his dollars to work with are likely going to be. How does that manifest itself in transportation expectations in the master plan? So that's
I'm just curious, is some thought given before too late, too long, to sort of do a debriefing of Keith Bergman? Because he has his hands in so many different transportation-related programs.
That's an excellent idea, and that idea hasn't been kicked around, but we certainly would have an opportunity to do that in the fourth quarter of this year. Though he's committed to being available to us through January or so, and I expect, particularly given that this is one of his sort
Yeah,
of
it is. I mean, it's
intense interests,
yeah.
we can probably pull him in come December.
Because anytime you mention bus or train or depot or rails or bus stops, sidewalks, he's there, so.
That's a superb idea. I'll
Yeah,
pass
I
that along to
mean,
Pam.
it's institutional knowledge. Are we in a position to set a November meeting yet?
To me, it's always good to get it on the schedule so we can shoot
Okay,
at it.
so October 29th is the town meeting.
No.
October 29th is the, what?
October 29th.
October 29th is the town meeting. So,
Monday night.
so what is the next open date? I'm sorry.
Well, real quick before we talk about November, so
Yeah,
we have the meeting on the 11th for the open house, and then we're meeting that following
right.
Tuesday.
Right,
Um,
the 16th.
Right. Do we have a sense of what our purpose would be for that? Or does the 11th count as our October meeting? I'm just curious.
I was looking at the 16th to get, shall we say, the initial assessment of how successful or not we've been, at least our first cut, at a bare minimum. Plus, we have to take a vote.
A vote for, oh, right. Okay. Well, the reason why I was asking is knowing how much we ask of Fort Point, is 3 business days enough for them to do what they need to do to get us where we need to be? In other words, is that enough, is 3 business days enough for them to calculate or organize their thoughts and come back and report to us in a timely manner? Or should we give them more time?
I think that's a good question, but I think they should be the determinants. I would argue that there's no possible way they could do it, but that's just an assumption I'm
Well,
making.
that's kind of what I was thinking.
So, but I think that, I don't think that doesn't mean we can't meet on the 16th. I just think it means that that's not going to be on the agenda.
No, I mean,
There'll be other stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
And if it's a short meeting, just
yeah.
because we don't have that much other stuff, then let it be a short meeting.
No, I don't want to, I was not looking for a definitive, assessment. This would just be, this is what we think we've done here. Here's the crowd size, this is what we're going to do, yeah.
The other reason, though, that we may want to keep it relatively close to that is that we may want to synthesize our thoughts associated with it, to the extent that we're engaging with residents in a way that Fort Point is not. And so by doing it on the 16th, Fort Point probably won't be ready.
Right.
But we can synthesize our thoughts, make sure that there's nothing that we want to pass along to them for their consideration as they're synthesizing those thoughts.
I'm also thinking that if we have to speak to anything during town meeting, whether it's, who knows who's going to be called upon for the sewering or anything else, this would also give us a chance to get prepared. I mean, I've walked into town meetings where selectmen pulled me aside and said, we want you to talk about this topic, and, I don't say I'm looking forward to it or want to do it, it's just that it happens.
Well, with that in mind, then, should we actually schedule another meeting in case we need it for Fort Point, so that we have it sometime that week of the 23rd, or not?
Should the meeting just be moved to the 23rd? Does that help?
Well, that's kind of what I was going to, but
Yeah,
they're
no, we
saying they
certainly
don't
could.
need to,
Yeah.
so. Anyway, I just thought
I would
I'd
prefer
bring,
to not do two back-to-back, the 16th and the 23rd.
yeah.
Right.
My preference would be one or the other.
and
Oh, yeah, I
and-
wasn't thinking, you were thinking of just going to the 23rd?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
moving to.
Maren, do we have this room at the 23rd?
I can certainly check.
Okay. Is there anyone here who doesn't want to do it on the 23rd? Give us a longer lead time.
Right, gives Fort
Good
Point
idea.
more time
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
no problem. I have no.
and, right.
Okay, so we're going to put in the 23rd and leave it to Maren to work magic and get us one of the
A
larger
meeting room.
rooms. Yes, this room preferred. Okay.
And then, for a vote, if we could steal away some time together on the 11th,
Yeah.
kind of like what we did at the end of the
Yeah.
July meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll want to do that to the extent that an insert is,
It'll be,
I suppose. It'll
be gone
an
from
insert,
there,
so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
So,
Can we do that, though?
yes, as long as we have a quorum.
You
Yep.
yeah,
As long as you
be
post
a
it.
posted meeting.
And
It's a meeting.
yeah.
will we be in a proper room?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Third grade. No, I'm sorry.
We can do that.
Where it
Middle
all went
school,
wrong.
seventh grade, sorry, seventh grade.
Okay, so then that takes us to November.
Right. So what's the first open date first open dates we have for November?
Well, we had been doing the second Tuesday, so that would put it the 13th. And
Okay.
that's a full week and a half prior to Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
Sounds good to me. Anybody, is that agreeable, November 13th? Okay, and we'll have a lot of information by then, hopefully. All right, Maren, any minutes?
Yes, I had emailed them.
Oh, right.
Oh, I forgot to print out. I'm sorry.
All right,
Okay.
I saw them
So,
electronically.
they'll be very early for next time around.
All right.
Like I said.
All right, so we don't have to, okay. We'll delay yet again, okay? We'll play the video again. All right, is there any other business? Do I hear a motion for adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, very much.